We grew up hating Sherman. I'm kind of returning to the old time, where growing up in Atlanta, we despised Sherman for what he did to us, our buildings, our homes, and our people.
Sherman didn't bring on the war, as far as he's concerned. He decided to disregard the Constitution. Now you're paying the consequences of it. And don't blame me for that. Don't blame me for that. It's not my fault. I'm here. I didn't start this, but by God, I'm going to end it.
It is the spring of 1864. The American Civil War is entering its fourth year. 500,000 Americans are dead, 1 million more wounded. Yet there is no end in sight. In the North, President Abraham Lincoln is facing re-election. His prospects are dim. Northern support for the war is wavering. And Lincoln's political opponents are calling for a negotiated peace with the Confederacy. If Lincoln loses, it is the end of the United States, and the end to the dream of freedom for 4 million slaves. Lincoln must show that Union armies can win the war. He needs a victory. This is the situation in April of 1864, as Sherman prepares to invade Georgia.
What happened in Georgia in 1864 did determine whether or not there was going to be a United States.
April through December 1864. 37 weeks that will bring the wrath of war to Georgia. And even though Sherman brings a larger army, roughly 110,000 men to the Confederate 70,000, the Southerners have good reason to believe they can win.
The Confederates still felt like they had this opportunity to win if this system that they had put in place, this idea that they were going to wear down the United States Army and the United States government and the people of the United States into giving up, that means Atlanta really is critical.
Atlanta is the hinge point of the Confederacy. It's the strategic railroad hub of the Deep South. It's a manufacturing center. Everything that moves east and west through the Confederacy, men, material, supplies, everything comes through Atlanta. It is second only to Richmond in terms of its strategic importance to the Confederacy.
We have been fighting Atlanta all the time, capturing guns and wagons, marked Atlanta and made here. Since they've been doing so much to destroy us, we have to destroy them. William T. Sherman.
But the destruction of Atlanta starts long before Sherman arrives. A year earlier, houses, farms, and fences are dismantled to make way for what will become a 12-mile ring of fortifications around the city. Built with slave labor, these elaborate trenches made Atlanta the third most fortified city, behind only Washington and Richmond. But back before the war, this city, so critical to the Confederate cause, was not enthusiastic about secession. In the election of 1860, Atlantans voted for pro-Union candidates.
From the very beginning, Atlanta was dominated not by farmers or planters, but by railroad and commercial men. They were making money in the American Union, and they did not believe that current political circumstances called for drastic action.
Part of Atlanta's commercial success is due to the Western and Atlantic Railroad, linking Atlanta to Chattanooga. Now, in the spring of 1864, the Western and Atlantic will serve as Sherman's sole supply line, leading him directly to Atlanta.
His challenge is to make certain that his 110,000 men, his 40 or 50,000 animals, get fed every day. He has figured out how much food and fodder each car can bring. He's ordered every car. He's also worked with the civil authorities to restrict civilian traffic. This shows the genius, if not mania, of Sherman. And I think it presages him as the more capable commander against Joe Johnston.
What will become known as the Atlanta Campaign pits two respected and battle-tested generals against one another. For the Union, 44-year-old Major General William Tecumseh Sherman, the man who vows to make Georgia howl.
Well, William T. Sherman is probably one of the most fascinating figures in a war that had a lot of fascinating people in it. He was originally from Ohio, had a very tragic background as a child. His father had died, and his mother basically turned him over to another family to raise when he was 9 years old.
Sherman's new foster father was Thomas Ewing, later the first U.S. Secretary of the Interior and a U.S. Senator. When Sherman was 16, his foster father helped him get an appointment to West Point. Sherman graduated in 1840. 4 years later, military duties brought him to North Georgia, where he traveled widely, memorizing the landscape. It was an experience that would serve him well 20 years later.
Sherman knew kind of the lay of the land. He knew what the high points and the rivers and the mountains and the areas that he should take into account. Joe Johnston didn't have that knowledge.
Bored with the peacetime army, Sherman resigned in 1853 to try his hand at business and banking in San Francisco. After failing there, he took a job as superintendent of a military academy in Louisiana, what would become Louisiana State University. As talk of war ramped up among secessionists, Sherman wrote to a friend,
"You people of the South don't know what you're doing. This country will be drenched in blood, and God only knows how it will end. You people speak so lightly of war. You don't know what you're talking about. War is a terrible thing. William T. Sherman."
When the war breaks out in 1861, Sherman rejoins the U.S. Army. Within a year, he suffers a nervous breakdown.
Sherman at the beginning of the war was a total wreck. He was stationed in Kentucky, and he had a nervous breakdown. He imagined hundreds of thousands of Confederate soldiers coming up to attack him, and the Secretary of War, Simon Cameron, at that time went to visit with him and basically walked away saying, this guy is really losing it. And he did have a nervous breakdown.
After several weeks' rest at home in Ohio, and with the support of his wife Ellen and his friend Ulysses S. Grant, Sherman soon recovered.
He's rescued by General Grant, who brings him back, wants him in the Army, knows his abilities and talent. And so Sherman later said that Grant stood by me when I was crazy, I stood by him when he was accused of being a drunk, and now we stand by each other in all things.
The man charged with defending Georgia against Sherman is a 57-year-old blue blood from Virginia named Joseph Eggleston Johnston. Johnston is also a West Point graduate, but unlike Sherman, he saw combat in the Mexican War, where he was wounded twice and promoted for gallantry. In 1861, he has more than 30 years' service in the U.S. Army.
Well, Joe Johnston and Jefferson Davis get into it early on over a question of rank and seniority. Essentially, Johnston doesn't get the rank that he feels he deserves, and that creates bad blood between the two men that lasts through the entire war. Now, on the other hand, Johnston's men adore him. When he takes over the Army, they had just had this terrible defeat at Missionary Ridge. They were very dispirited. He gets them resupplied, he gets them new uniforms, even new flags. And so Johnston really restores the Army's sense of esprit de corps, and his men love him for it.
While most white Georgians feared Sherman's army, enslaved African Americans held a different view, a providential view rooted in a different brand of Christianity than that of their slaveholders.
Many of them called him the second Moses or the second Aaron. So they sort of saw him as this conquering hero.
There's the idea that this war has been sent for the express purpose of freeing the slaves on the one hand, but it's a demonstration of God's wrath for the continued practice of slaveholding.
On May 7, 1864, the first shots of the Atlanta campaign are fired at Tunnel Hill, just a few miles northwest of Dalton, where a small Confederate force tried unsuccessfully to defend the tunnel. Near here, Joe Johnston's Confederate army is dug in along Rocky Face Ridge, 80 miles north of Atlanta.
Well, Joe Johnston really wants Sherman to attack Rocky Face Ridge head on. Now, Sherman is not the smartest tactician in the Army, but he's smart enough not to do that.
Instead, Sherman sees a chance to trap and destroy Johnston's entire army. He sends General James McPherson and 24,000 men through Snake Creek Gap to trap Johnston behind the ridge. But McPherson moves too slow.
A little bit too cautious, a little bit too slow. His first time in Army command, doesn't move fast enough. Johnston slips the trap. And Sherman later says, "Mac, you missed the opportunity of a lifetime."
Johnston escapes, but retreats, the first of many. Later, he too misses an opportunity to turn the tables on Sherman. At Cassville, Johnston sees a chance to destroy an isolated column of Sherman's army, perhaps ending Sherman's entire campaign. Finding Union soldiers on his flank, Johnston cancels the attack. By May 25th, barely 2 weeks into the campaign, Johnston has been repeatedly outflanked and has retreated some 50 miles across two major rivers. He begs for reinforcements, but there are none to be had, and Sherman is now 30 miles from Atlanta.
Sherman's army is larger than Johnston's army, so he's continually able to hold Johnston in place with one hand and then send part of the army around with the other hand and always get behind Johnston and therefore compel Johnston to fall back. And this happens for time and time and time again until Johnston basically is across the Chattahoochee River right up to the gates of Atlanta.
In Atlanta, a 40-year-old bookseller named Sam Richards takes a walk after dinner in City Cemetery, now Oakland Cemetery. His diary entry of May 15th describes how war has already come to Atlanta.
The saddest sight that I have ever seen is the acre of fresh-dug graves that are filled by dead soldiers, the result of this terrible war. Sam Richards.
He said it was an incredibly moving sight to him because he saw an acre of freshly dug graves, and it was just a symbol to him of the carnage.
Richards, who was born in England, was a pre-war Unionist who came to embrace the Confederate cause. That support, however, did not include a willingness to fight. Because printers were exempt from the draft, Richards became a typesetter on a newspaper.
For several days, our citizens have heard artillery at the front. Governor Brown has called out the militia, and I have joined a company of printers for city defense. I trust we may never be called into action. I hate the sight of a musket.
But Atlanta will soon see muskets and much, much more.
You know, from Sherman's perspective, he felt like the turning point of the campaign was when he crossed the Etowah River. He called the Etowah the Rubicon. He said, "I have crossed the Rubicon of Georgia." And he thought, if I can get across that river, then I can get across any river ahead of me. And basically, I'm going to be in Atlanta eventually.
By now, Johnston's men are dispirited. They all wonder when Joe Johnston will finally make a stand.
You're familiar with Mary Boykin Chestnut's diary, and in it she gives the famous bird shoot analogy, that General Johnston never took a shot at a bird shoot because he wanted to maintain his reputation as a perfect marksman.
In late May, Joe Johnston does make a stand. along a 10-mile defensive line running from Pickett's Mill through New Hope Church to Dallas. Fierce fighting along this line finally slows down Sherman's advance. Soldiers on both sides called it hellhole.
Deep ravines and hills and this kind of thick undergrowth, jungle-like undergrowth. You got poor roads. Both armies are having trouble keeping their men supplied because they're well off the railroad and their wagons can't make it across the rough country. And it's just a miserable experience all around. So you can really understand why the soldiers called it the hellhole.
It is now a war of attrition. Soldiers on both sides endure horrible conditions: extreme heat, disease, and exhaustion, thunderstorms that fill trenches with mud, and unburied bodies that create an overpowering stench. The overwhelming number of dead and the hardships of war mean that traditional funeral rituals cannot always be observed. Some men are buried hastily in mass graves. Many are never identified. In Georgia, Rhoda Mobley receives a letter informing her of the death of her husband, Francis, in far-off Virginia, and that is where he is buried. The letter not only delivers the dreaded news, but also a memento of her dead husband. Your brave and noble-hearted husband requested me to send you the ball that killed him. By mid-June, Sherman is within 25 miles of Atlanta. Joe Johnston's army is now dug in at Kennesaw Mountain, overlooking the Western and Atlantic Railroad. It is the strongest defense line the Confederates will ever have north of Atlanta. Union Private Gilmer Watts of McLean County, Illinois, writes his wife Clara.
There will probably be a great battle here before long in which we will have a part.
Watts is a 35-year-old schoolteacher and father of 2 young children.
I may be killed or wounded. Should I be called away, I know you will grieve deeply. I would not have it otherwise.
At home in Illinois, Clara replies,
I do so hope the war will be over this year, but oh, how I tremble lest you may fall. God grant that we may all be spared to spend a happy life together.
Gilmer never reads Clara's words. On June 19, 1864, while patrolling the picket line in front of Kennesaw Mountain, he is shot and killed. On June 27th, the Confederate Army on Kennesaw Mountain has blocked Sherman for 9 days. Frustrated, Sherman orders a frontal assault.
Sherman may be tired of flanking. As he says in his memoirs, he wanted to show the rebels as much as he wanted to show his own men that he was not averse to launching a frontal assault.
The main attack takes place on a hilltop where the Confederate line made a sharp turn, a place forever after known as the Dead Angle. Here, Union soldiers in columns 20 men deep charge up an open hillside toward well-entrenched Confederate troops.
The only time that he does that, and he lives to regret it, in the same way that Grant came to regret what happened at Cold Harbor by making a frontal assault, Sherman makes a frontal assault at Kennesaw Mountain and is severely repulsed with heavy casualties.
I've heard men say that if they ever killed a Yankee during the war, they were not aware of it. I am satisfied that on this memorable day, every man in our regiment killed from 20 to 100 each. All that was necessary was to load and shoot. Sam Watkins.
Shooting as fast as he can, Confederate Sam Watkins finds his rifle too hot to touch. As heaps of Union bodies pile in front of his trench, soldiers vomit from the heat. Soon the fighting is hand to hand, but the Confederates hold.
The sun beaming down on our uncovered heads, the thermometer being 110 degrees in the shade, and a solid line of blazing fire right from the muzzles of the Yankee guns poured right into our very faces, singeing our hair and clothes. The hot blood of our dead and wounded spurting on us, and the awful concussion causing the blood to gush out of our noses and ears. And above all, the roar of battle made it a perfect pandemonium. Sam Watkins.
Within 3 hours, 3,000 Union soldiers are killed or wounded. Sherman halts the attack and looks for another way around the Confederate line. He writes his wife.
I begin to regard the death and mangling of a couple of thousand men as a small affair. William T. Sherman.
The Federals do lose significant numbers, but not so much that it limits their options, and ultimately they are able to flank the Confederates out of even that formidable position.
On July 2nd, Sherman finally manages to outflank the Confederate line, and Johnston once again is forced to withdraw. 3 days later, he orders Atlanta's munitions factories and hospitals evacuated. An Atlanta newspaper, the Daily Intelligencer, commented,
"Speculation was rife yesterday to establish the reason for our retreat. Today it is more eagerly agitated. What will we do next? Our street generals have it that we will be flanked to the Gulf."
By July 9th, Sherman's army is across the Chattahoochee River, the last natural barrier protecting Atlanta. Johnston retreats to a defensive line just north of the city.
And it was at this point that Atlanta truly began to become unglued. There was a mad dash for the passenger depot. It was complete pandemonium as people began to leave the city in great haste.
Atlanta's population has dwindled rapidly, from 20,000 a year before to about 4,000 now.
Atlanta's population consisted mostly of white women and children and slaves, since most men had either joined the Confederate Army, been conscripted into the Confederate Army, or left the city hoping to avoid conscription.
Just north of Atlanta, Nellie Jett fears for her farm, her 4 children, and 2 elderly in-laws. She writes to her husband serving in the Confederate Army in Virginia.
"I wish you was at home. I know if the main army falls back here, we will perish. I don't know what to do. I ain't got the money to take us off, so we will have to stand the test. I ain't gonna run."
Many of Atlanta's women see the realities of war up close. They have served as nurses, war workers, and volunteers. And one group of women is especially hard hit.
So Sherman gets to the Roswell Mills, where they're making cloth for Confederate uniforms. And a lot of the workers there are women. And Sherman, as far as he's concerned, these women are Confederate sympathizers. So he has the mills burned, he has the women charged with treason, he loads them up onto railroad cars, they're taken up to Indiana and dumped off to fend for themselves. And we don't really know what happened to them after that.
With the Confederate Army backed up to within 5 miles of Atlanta, President Jefferson Davis is afraid that Johnston will give up the city without a fight. Davis believes the Confederacy must hold Atlanta at all cost. He has to make an agonizing decision. On July 17th, Davis relieves Johnston of command. In his place, Davis appoints 32-year-old General John Bell Hood.
The other part of it is that General Hood, who is a corps commander under General Johnston, is surreptitiously writing to Richmond, going around his commander and sending reports saying he's not going to fight. If I had the opportunity, I could fight. I will fight. You know my record in Virginia. You know that I'm aggressive.
Hood is one of the rising stars in the Confederacy. His personal courage is legendary. At Gettysburg, shrapnel cost him the use of his left arm. At Chickamauga, a bullet took his right leg.
President Davis, after the fall of the city, told a friend, "After Johnston had crossed the Chattahoochee, I was convinced Atlanta would fall. But I was determined that it would not fall without our striking manly blows." So he put in General Hood to strike manly blows.
And strike he will. Hood knows that Sherman can't attack Atlanta's massive fortifications head-on. Instead, Sherman's goal is to cut the 4 railroads that keep the city supplied. Hood has to keep at least one railroad open if he is to have any chance of saving Atlanta. Less than 48 hours after his appointment, Hood launches his first attack. On July 20th, he strikes north of Atlanta, near Peachtree Creek. There, he catches Sherman by surprise. But Sherman's veterans rally and push back the Confederates. Undeterred, Hood attacks again 2 days later, just east of the city. In what's now known as the Battle of Atlanta, 58,000 men fight for control of the railroad leading to Augusta. But once again, Sherman's veterans hold their ground.
Now, on the one hand, Hood can't afford to bleed his men in an attack. But on the other hand, he can't afford to not attack because the situation is desperate. He's got to gamble. He's got to go all out.
During the battle, a Union general riding close to the front is surprised by Confederate soldiers emerging from the woods. The soldiers fire and a bullet rips through the lungs of General James McPherson, killing him instantly. Just 35 years old, his death is mourned by the commanding generals on both sides. Sherman thought of him as a friend and wept openly upon hearing the news. And John Bell Hood was McPherson's roommate at West Point.
When Hood hears the news that McPherson has been killed, he writes, "I will record the death of my classmate and boyhood friend, General James B. McPherson, the announcement of which caused me sincere sorrow."
Sherman resumes his advance on Atlanta, this time from the west, trying to cut the Macon Railroad, the city's only remaining supply route. On July 28th, one of Hood's subordinates launches a frontal attack near Ezra Church. It is a disaster. The Confederates lose 3,000 men to the Union's 700. But Hood has succeeded in keeping the railroad to Atlanta open. Sherman knows that the 12-mile ring of fortifications surrounding Atlanta is too strong to penetrate. Frustrated, he tries another tactic, unleashing a barrage of fire that no other American city has ever endured. The bombardment will last for 5 weeks.
Sherman wanted to do a number on Atlanta, and we wanted to destroy Atlanta and make it a desolation. He would tell his artillery commanders, "Fire 50 rounds, all guns that can reach downtown. Fire all the guns that can strike the buildings of Atlanta."
For the roughly 3,000 civilians remaining in Atlanta, it is horrifying. One of the first casualties is a freed African American who runs a barber shop in the Atlanta Hotel, Solomon Lucky.
A shell strikes the iron lamppost. Part of it hits him in the leg. He dies by nightfall of loss of blood, shock, or hemorrhage. Don't know. Today, the iron lamppost stands where it was, now an underground at what was then Alabama and Whitehall.
Sherman orders his men to fire from every gun you have that will reach any of its houses. Sam Richards writes,
"A gentleman and his little girl, 10 years of age, were both killed by the same shell last week." Sam Richards.
It is one of the most tragic stories of the entire bombardment. The story of Joseph Warner and his 10-year-old daughter, Lizzie.
They have their house in northwest Atlanta, and they're sleeping on the night of August 3rd when a shell comes through and kills her, disembowels him. He's dead within an hour or so. They're buried in Oakland Cemetery, in the city cemetery. And it just shows that, this war, this bombardment, can be reduced to very pathetic individual terms.
In her diary, another 10-year-old girl, Carrie Berry, records her feelings.
"How I wish the Federals would quit shelling us and we could get out of the cellar and get some fresh air. The shells get worse and worse every day."
We're not sure how many Atlantans were still in the city by this point, but probably a couple thousand. And they took refuge in holes that they dug in their cellars or their gardens.
A lot of Atlantans, the wealthy ones, especially who had spacious backyards, had their slaves dig what we'd call bomb-proof shelters. And some of these bomb-proofs were large enough to accommodate a couple of dozen people.
But in August of 1864, the enslaved population is shrinking.
A growing number of slaves were running away in groups, and some of them were running to Union lines.
Carrie Berry writes about the family's enslaved house servant, Mary.
Mary went off this evening, and I don't expect she will come back anymore.
It was no secret to the slaves when there had been Confederate setbacks and when the Union Army was advancing. So they were, I think, pretty well poised by this time to seize every opportunity to take their own freedom into their hands.
By late August, an estimated 30,000 shells have pummeled Atlanta. Under such dire circumstances, no one has time to keep accurate records. It's estimated that at least 50 civilians were killed or wounded. But Sherman is no closer to victory. His bombardment has done nothing to weaken Hood's Confederate army. Meanwhile, in Chicago, the Democrats nominate former General George McClellan on a platform calling for a negotiated peace with the Confederacy. The stalemate at Atlanta is seen as proof the war cannot be won. Lincoln's re-election and the prospects for union and emancipation are very much in doubt. Lincoln remarks, "I'm going to be beaten, and unless some change takes place, badly beaten." But back in Atlanta on August 26th, war-weary residents awake to a strange sound. Silence. The shelling has stopped.
The Confederate defenders assume that maybe Sherman has given up and he is retreating north because he doesn't seem to be anywhere around.
It was wishful thinking on the Confederates' part. Instead, Sherman, frustrated with the stalemate in Atlanta, has taken most of his army on a wide flanking march sweeping to the west and south of the city. Confederate counterattacks to hold the railroad fail.
He hits the railroad above Jonesboro, cuts the last railroad supply line into Atlanta, and essentially at that point, the jig is up for Hood, and by extension, the jig is up for Atlanta, and that's effectively going to be Union victory in the Civil War.
With all of Atlanta's supply lines now destroyed, General Hood knows it is over. If his army stays in the city, it will be starved to death. He orders an immediate evacuation. On the night of September 1st, a huge explosion rocks Atlanta.
The Confederates have an ammunition train that's stranded in Atlanta, and rather than let it fall into the hands of the Yankees, they have to blow it up. And it's such a huge explosion that it shatters windows and rattles windows all over Atlanta. It's this huge explosion. And 15 miles away down in Jonesboro, Sherman hears this, and he knows what it means. He knows that Hood is evacuating Atlanta.
On that September evening, as Hood's men march out of Atlanta, many of them sing the sad ballad Lorena as they depart.
It matters little now, Lorena. The past is in the eternal past.
On September 2nd, with Confederate troops gone, Mayor James Calhoun and a group of leading citizens ride out the Marietta Road to meet Sherman's advance guard. There, Calhoun formally surrenders the city. That night, Sherman telegraphs Lincoln, "And so Atlanta is ours and fairly won." The news electrifies the North. Lincoln's political fortunes soar with renewed hope for his re-election. It is one of the greatest turning points in American history. 10-year-old Carrie Berry writes of the soldiers in blue uniforms.
They are orderly and behave themselves. I think I shall like the Yankees very well.
But within a week, Sherman issues Special Field Order 67, expelling all remaining civilians from the city. Mayor Calhoun pleads with Sherman to reverse the order, saying it would cause overwhelming hardship. Sherman responds, "War is cruelty, and you cannot refine it."
The reason that Sherman wanted all the civilians out of town is because he didn't want to have to babysit a bunch of Southern sympathizers and possibly Southern saboteurs. And worse still, he didn't want to have to feed them with the rations that he needed for his army.
Among those forced to leave are the so-called secret Yankees, Northern sympathizers who kept their sentiments to themselves during the war. They are successful businessmen like Alfred Austell, a banker, William Markham, who ran the iron rolling mill, and Edward Rawson, a Vermont native whose huge mansion called the Terraces was taken over by Union General John White Geary.
All those secret Yankees who had hoped to be able to stay in the city and protect their property, no, he kicks them out too. They're mortified, but they have to go.
A few Atlantans are allowed to stay.
We commenced packing up to move. Papa heard uptown there was a chance for us to stay if he could get into business.
Carrie Berry's family is one of the few allowed to remain after her father, Madison, got a job as a clerk for the Union Army. For the nearly 3,000 white Atlantans forced to leave, it is an awful time. Roughly half are shipped south, others are sent north.
They can take some of their belongings, but not all of them, and of course they have to leave their residences behind. And maybe 1,600 Atlantans will be dumped into rebel lines, and the Confederates have to put them on the train and carry them into Macon.
But for Atlanta's African-American population, it is a time of celebration.
They were celebrating freedom because of the arrival of the Yankees in Atlanta meant the end of slavery in Atlanta. And so for several days, African Americans filled the streets to celebrate this long-awaited, long-rumored arrival of the Yankees.
One unpleasant feature of present circumstances is the impudent air Negroes put on, and their indifference to the needs of their former masters. Sam Richards.
One of Atlanta's finest houses, the Neal Residence, now becomes Sherman's stately headquarters. This photograph, and around 200 others, are taken by George Barnard, hired by the Union Army to make a visual record of Atlanta and its fortifications. Barnard's photographs are the only ones made of wartime Atlanta.
The hot summer continued into the fall, and so it must have been sort of surreal because the city was just covered in dead animals, shell casings. It must have been a kind of spooky place, with most of the civilian population having been expelled in September.
Meanwhile, General John Bell Hood moves into North Georgia, trying to trap Sherman in Atlanta by cutting his only supply line to the north, the Western and Atlantic Railroad. Sherman sends some of his army north to chase Hood away from the railroad, but they can't reach Dalton in time. Here, 40,000 Confederate soldiers surround a Union garrison of only 850 men, guarding the railroad. Most are escaped slaves, like Hubbard Pryor of Polk County, Georgia. For more than a year, African Americans have fought in the segregated U.S. colored troops. This regiment is guarding the railroad behind the lines. Sherman refuses to have black regiments on the front lines.
Sherman was quoted once as saying that he believed that slavery was good for black people. So we know that he was no liberal.
Hubbard Pryor and his fellow soldiers in the 44th U.S. Colored Troops find themselves on the front lines anyway. Despite the impossible odds, they want to fight. Their white officers, however, believe their men will be massacred and choose to surrender.
Some of the men of the 44th were actually sent back to their former owners and re-enslaved. And those turned out to be the lucky ones. Most of them were put to work building Confederate fortifications, and they were almost worked to death. And it is just one of the saddest stories of the war. Here are these guys that had enlisted with such high hopes, and they suffered so much afterwards.
In Atlanta, the occupation and the destruction continues. Sherman's engineers dismantle hundreds of now vacant houses, using their timbers to build a new line of fortifications for his army. An army which in early November cast ballots in the presidential election. Sherman's soldiers vote overwhelmingly for Lincoln, who wins in a near landslide. Despite the renewed Northern resolve to win the war, Confederate resistance continues. Abandoning his effort to trap Sherman in Atlanta, Hood moves his army west into Alabama, preparing to invade Middle Tennessee. But Sherman realizes he can't stay in Atlanta, at the end of a long and vulnerable railroad supply line that the Confederates could eventually destroy. Instead, he has to abandon his supply line and take the offensive. Now Sherman comes up with a new plan to crush Confederate resistance, once and for all.
So what does Sherman do? He divides his army. He sends part of his army up into North Georgia and Tennessee to deal with Hood, and he sends the rest of the army to Savannah, where it can be resupplied by sea, and then march north to Virginia to finish off Lee.
By this, I propose to demonstrate the vulnerability of the South that make its inhabitants feel that war and individual ruin are synonymous. I will push into the heart of Georgia, destroying all. I can make the march and make Georgia howl. William T. Sherman.
He determines that he has to leave behind him a wasteland, in that he has to destroy anything that can be used by the Confederate Army to continue to wage war, to resist the United States. So that's why in Atlanta you're going to see the destruction of the again, the mills, the factories, the railroad, anything that can be used.
On November 11th, Sherman's engineers begin carrying out a careful block-by-block demolition plan. They knock down public buildings with battering rams, including the gasworks and factories. Fearing that fire might get out of control, Sherman instructs his men not to burn any buildings until the last minute. He also places the churches and houses of downtown Atlanta under guard to prevent arson. At the same time, sick or injured soldiers are loaded onto the last trains headed north. Hundreds of African Americans hitch a ride. Once the last trains have left, Sherman's men tear up 40 miles of the Western and Atlantic Railroad above Atlanta, cutting their last link to the north. On the afternoon of November 15th, as Sherman's men file through the outskirts of Atlanta, they decide to wreak their own vengeance. Here, none of the houses are under guard. A Union officer from Ohio writes in his diary,
"We arrived in the suburbs of Atlanta at 2 p.m. No sooner did we arrive than the boys commenced burning every house in that part of town. The wind was blowing hard, and soon that part of the city was gone." Captain James Ladd.
General Slocum, who commanded the 20th Corps occupying the city, offered a $500 reward for any soldier who would turn in a comrade as an unintended arsonist. No one turned their comrades in.
During the night, engineers set fire to the rubble of the train depot and to the commercial buildings in the downtown business district. True to Sherman's orders, they spare churches and homes in the area. Meanwhile, the band of the 33rd Massachusetts Regiment gives its last concert in Atlanta. When the engineers arrive to burn the concert hall where they are performing, the band moves down the street to serenade General Sherman at his headquarters. A Union major writes,
"Tonight I heard the really fine band of the 33rd Massachusetts playing 'John Brown's Soul Goes Marching On' by the light of the burning buildings. I have never heard that noble anthem when it was so grand, so solemn, so inspiring." Major Ward Nichols.
On the morning of November 16th, Sherman's army marches out of Atlanta as clouds of dense black smoke rise behind them.
There were officers in Atlanta who had breakfast in the home that they had occupied, an empty mansion. And when they were finished, they stacked everything in the middle of the floor of the mansion and burned the mansion. There was no military value in that. There was no purpose to do that.
In all, about 40% of Atlanta is destroyed. But Sherman is not finished. Having cut his own supply lines, Sherman sets off on a 250-mile march to Savannah, straight through Confederate territory. His men will carry only the bare essentials, gathering food and forage along the way.
What Sherman was contemplating doing had never really been done before. I mean, Sherman was cutting loose of his supply lines and going to live largely, not entirely, but largely off the land.
He claimed in his memoir to have a census map of the state so that he knew for every county in Georgia how many bushels of corn, how many hundreds of cattle, hogs, etc. were in the state, so that he could plan his route through essentially the breadbasket of Georgia.
What Sherman's men can't eat, they destroy. Sherman cuts a 50-mile wide swath through central Georgia. The Confederacy is powerless to stop him. Sherman is making good on his promise to make Georgia howl.
We have devoured the land, and our animals eat up the wheat and cornfields close. All the people retire before us, and desolation is behind. To realize what war is, one should follow our tracks. William T. Sherman.
Sherman's march is not just a war on Southern resources. It's also a war on white Southern morale.
So it's really the psychological impact. It's the terror. Sherman's waging war against the minds of his opponents. He may not even haven't gotten to a town, but someone's afraid he's coming to my town and what he might do. And those women begin to write letters to their husbands in the army. And they say, you must come home. This is ridiculous. We cannot continue the struggle.
On November 23rd, Sherman's men enter Milledgeville, the capital of Georgia. In the abandoned State House, they hold a mock legislative session in which they repeal the Ordinance of Secession.
When the Federals move into Milledgeville, they have a lot of fun. They find a whole lot of Confederate currency. So they end up stuffing money in their pockets so that they can, as they said, spend it when they go deeper into the South.
With them go thousands of slaves. By the time they're near Savannah, thousands of refugee slaves are following Sherman's army, seeking freedom and offering information on Confederate movements. Sherman is afraid they will clog the roads and slow down his army. 20 miles outside of Savannah, at Ebenezer Creek, one of Sherman's commanders orders a temporary bridge dismantled after the army crosses, but before any refugees can follow. Soon to their horror, some Confederate cavalry who have been shadowing Sherman's movements come upon them. Many are clubbed or stabbed. Some swim across, others drown.
Sights of elderly men hobbling across as best they could, women with babies in arms trying to cross. It was one of those, it was a terrible tragedy.
After brushing aside a small force of Confederate defenders, Sherman's men enter Savannah. It is December 21st, 1864. A triumphant Sherman telegrams President Abraham Lincoln.
I beg to present you as a Christmas gift the city of Savannah with 150 guns and plenty of ammunition. Also about 25,000 bales of cotton. William T. Sherman.
In 37 weeks, Sherman's armies have marched more than 300 miles across Georgia. Atlanta, industrial hub of the Deep South, is in ruins. Bridges, cotton, livestock, factories, telegraph lines, and hundreds of miles of railroads are destroyed. In Savannah, Sherman makes the Charles Green Mansion his headquarters. And it is here that Sherman calls an unusual meeting of African American leaders, motivated perhaps by the tragedy at Ebenezer Creek. But his real objective was to solve a military problem.
What to do with these thousands of former slaves who were following his military soldiers at camp.
It's probably the first time in American history in which a white man asked a black man for advice. What do you think we ought to do?
The African American leaders tell Sherman that owning their own land is the only way to assure their freedom. But Sherman is far less concerned about freedom than he is about winning the war. 4 days after the meeting, Sherman issues Field Order 15, what came to be known as the 40 Acres and a Mule Plan.
The idea was to take 400,000 acres of these coastal rice and cotton plantations, divide it up into 40-acre parcels, and then distribute those parcels to the formerly enslaved people.
It didn't last long. Believing the land redistribution plan was too radical, the new President Andrew Johnson revokes Field Order 15 within a year.
So the land that the freedmen had been working, that they had every expectation was going to be theirs in a few years, is suddenly taken away from them.
Sherman's main objective was always to restore the Union, not to free 4 million enslaved Americans. In the end, Sherman's march through Georgia accomplished both.
I think that's where that ambivalence comes from. There's some who recognize that Sherman was just, in fact, doing his job, and that part of that job meant that they would benefit in some way, but not that he was necessarily personally invested or interested in what that outcome would be for them.
It was the most decisive 37 weeks in American history, forever changing who we are as a nation and redefining freedom. And the one figure who affected that outcome more than any other is also its most controversial, William Tecumseh Sherman. By the 1870s, he is the commanding general of the U.S. Army and one of the most popular figures in America.
During Reconstruction, immediately after the war, a lot of white Southerners actually saw Sherman as a pretty good guy. He's a Democrat. He's clearly a white supremacist. He thinks that Republican efforts to impose civil rights on the South is going too far. And they say, well, as for what he did during the war, well, he was just doing what he had to do.
In 1879, and again in 1881, thousands turned out to welcome the aging general back to Atlanta. Newspapers jokingly thanked Sherman for tearing down the old city to make way for a new one. And aging Sam Richards writes sarcastically,
General Sherman has just honored our city by a visit to see how nicely we've built it up after he burned it.
Richards was one of hundreds of businessmen who invested in rebuilding the city. Today, S.P. Richards Company is Atlanta's oldest business in continual operation. After the war, Sherman also befriended his old foes, Joseph E. Johnston and John Bell Hood. The ex-Confederate generals are fighting a war of words in their memoirs, blaming each other for losing Atlanta and the war. Both wanted Sherman to back up their stories. Sherman tried to help them both, but the controversy over who lost Atlanta continues to this day. In 1891, at the age of 71, William T. Sherman died at his home in New York City. 84-year-old Joseph E. Johnston is one of the pallbearers. It is a cold and rainy day. In a show of respect, Johnston refuses to wear a hat. He dies of pneumonia a month later. Towards the end of the 19th century, the white Southern view of Sherman is changing. Sherman becomes the most hated man in the South, his name synonymous with the brutality of war. And yet, he also becomes one of the most respected of military leaders.
Patton agreed with Sherman. This whole idea that any attempt to make war easy, to make it soft, is going to lead to disaster because it's just going to drag it out and make it longer and bloodier in the end. The idea is that to make it fast, as brutal, as violent as possible, get it over with. And Sherman ends up being a hero for so many American generals in the 20th century.
Still, the scorched earth of Georgia is a lasting memory. Today, the Atlanta of 1864 has disappeared, but thanks to the photographs of George Barnard, we know what once was. His panoramic view, taken from the top of the Female Institute, later destroyed by Sherman's engineers. Here is the view today from the same spot, a balcony of the Sheraton Hotel at Cortlandt and Ellis Streets. Decatur Street then, and today, where Georgia State students bustle about. And this view of a slave auction house on Peachtree Street. Today, home to the 5 Points Martyr Station. The Battle of Atlanta in East Atlanta at Bald Hill. A hill that was cut through to make room for Interstate 20 at Moreland Avenue. Sherman's headquarters at what was once Atlanta's finest home, the Neal Residence. Today, Atlanta City Hall. Just a few blocks away, on Fairley Street, the home of Carrie Berry and family. Carrie, the little girl whose diary told us so much about that time, never fully escaped the horrors of war. Her son served in World War I and was the victim of a gas attack and committed suicide after the war. He is buried in Atlanta's Oakland Cemetery, next to his mother.
Well, if William Tecumseh Sherman were to pay Atlanta a visit today, he would come right down I-75. Now, back in 1864, he came right down the Western and Atlantic Railroad.